Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's daily global COVID-19 show. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and it's my honor to gather this daily conversation around all things COVID-19. We talk in this show on topics about the three big crises happening in the world today: the health crisis, the financial crisis, and the racial inequality crisis. We are, in preparation for the November elections in the US, going to run several episodes that will focus on understanding the issues at stake. We're always looking for guests and theme suggestions, so please email me, sree@sree.net. Today's topic is understanding the US polls, and we're delighted and honored to bring to you in a few minutes Charles Franklin, who's at Polls and Votes on Twitter. He's the director of the Marquette Law School Poll. He's with pollster.com and pollsandvotes.com, and he's one of the leading experts on US polling. This is episode 149. We've been live for 149 straight days, and we are so excited to talk about polls and understanding such a complicated topic. You will meet Charles in just a few minutes. Hi, everybody. I'm Sree Sreenivasan. Thank you so much for being here. I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism. And I'm the co-founder of Digimentors, a social, digital, and virtual events consulting company. Our motto: don't cancel your event without talking to us. Don't even start planning your virtual event without talking to us. We do dozens of virtual events a month, and we've done events for 50 people and 100,000 people. So please email me. We'd love to chat about anything to do with virtual events. Sree@sree.net. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We're live right now on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. On all those platforms, you can find me and share this right now. I hope that's what Charles is doing, busy backstage, sharing this with his friends and followers and fans. If you're new here, this is Sree's daily global show on Scroll.in, one of India's leading news and culture and arts websites, where we have a global audience all over the world. We're able to do this because of our amazing producers, Rose Horowitz at Rose Horowitz 31 and Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon. Please follow them. In our first 140 episodes, we had 1 million plus viewers, 100 million social impressions, 260 guests, 148 of them women. We're going to keep working on upping that ratio. 53 cities, 15 countries for speakers, including the chief scientist of the WHO, teachers, professors, CEOs, founders, doctors, nurses, authors, journalists. But this might be our first pollster, and you'll meet him in just a couple of minutes. Please prep your questions about the elections. Tell us where you're watching from. What do you want to know about the elections, and how do those polls work? What did they get right? What did they get wrong? You're going to hear from the director of the Marquette Poll. And if anyone's watching who knows our friend Mark Lee, tell him that our speaker is from Marquette. He is a big Marquette fan and alum, so he will be especially excited to talk to Charles. We want to thank our sponsors, Muckrack Academy for fundamentals of social media for journalists, PR pros, and everyone. Free certification now available, mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. More than 4,000 people have signed up for that, and I hope you will too. We also want to thank nonbelievable.com, divinely delicious cookies on a mission. Each box of handcrafted cookies provides 2 meals to those in need, 20% off with the code SREE, SREE. Please order right now. Support Nonbelievable and support us on this show. And we also want to tell you about another big show that we produce. It's called She's on Call, and it runs on Sundays at 11 a.m. Eastern. Our friends, Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Korean, 2 doctors, surgeons in New York, talk about COVID and all kinds of other health issues. She's on Call on Facebook and Twitter. Please follow and please connect. And we want to tell you about our first video sponsor.
Hotstar Premiere Nights. Watch the year's biggest blockbusters streaming straight to your screen, exclusively on Hotstar.
Hotstar.com/US. And tomorrow, 9 p.m., our epic 2-hour 150th episode. 150 days, not a single break, no days off, as we covered this crisis. Some of our favorite guests will join us again, and we would love to see you join us. Share your comments and thoughts tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern in New York City time. It'll be 6:30 a.m. in India, and we are so grateful to everyone who's gotten us here. But today's show is all about the polls, understanding them. And Charles Franklin is with us at Polls and Votes. He's the director of the Marquette Law School Poll. All right, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, here's Charles. Hello, sir.
Hey, good to see you. Thank you for having me on.
You have an amazing setup. Look at that lighting. You are a pro, sir.
I don't have pictures in the background. I'm going to have to work hard to catch up to you on that. Needs a little color back there.
But your lighting is spectacular. Thank you so much. You do this TV stuff all day. So joining us on a Friday night, I can't tell you how grateful we are. We want to learn from you, sir. So first, let's talk. The first question I ask everybody is, how are you? Where are you? How has your family been dealing with the pandemic, et cetera?
Yeah, we're in Madison, Wisconsin, with my wife and our daughter who's living with us at home. We've been pretty much staying at home since March. I was in New York the first week of March and came home after that. So right at the front edge of the building epidemic in the country. And since being here, the one good thing about my work is that as long as I have an internet connection and caffeine, I can pretty much do my normal work.
Nice. And tell us where Madison is. Remember, we have a global audience.
Absolutely. Madison's a bit north and a little west of Chicago in Wisconsin, which is right north of Chicago. And I teach at Marquette Law School and work there doing the polling there. I should say my PhD is in political science. I'm not a lawyer, even though I am a professor of law. My work is exclusively devoted to the public opinion research and the civic education and outreach work that the law school supports.
So let's start there. Why does the law school have its own polling unit, and how did you come to be there?
In addition to the broad mission of the law school, which of course first and foremost is to train the next generation of attorneys, the law school also has had, before I was involved, a public policy program that involves distinguished journalists in the Milwaukee area who now work full-time at the law school, doing interviews with thought leaders, public officials. We also host campaign debates during the campaign season. And write about education issues, the Milwaukee area and its demographics and how that's changing. In 2012, I joined the law school to bring what I think of as the public's voice to those events. It's one thing to have elected officials or leaders in the community, but where's the voice of the public? And as a pollster, I believe that comes in part through polling. When we go out and each month interview 800 randomly selected citizens of Wisconsin, we're trying to represent their views to the broader community, to the public, to elected officials, and really to each other. And I think that's the role of polling that I grew up thinking was the value added of what we had to produce. And even after all these years, I still think that's a value. If you think about polling information, if there were no public polls by universities or by the news media, that would not put an end to polling. It would mean that interest groups have polling data, campaigns have polling data, and they would have no incentive to tell the public what they had found unless it was in their interests. This is where public polling can play a role by providing some of that information without the veneer of a campaign spin and the exclusivity of it being held by campaigns. So that's our mission, is to provide this sort of information, to talk about a variety of public policy issues. And oh yes, incidentally, who's leading in the horse race, because that also is certainly a big part of polling.
And that's one of the things that people say, we shouldn't concentrate on the horse race, we should talk about the issues, but it is so tempting to talk about the horse race part. So let's get some parameters of the Marquette Law School poll, but you of course can speak about other polls, and you're an expert on the topic in general, but let's talk about the Marquette poll, and I will show it as you speak.
Okay, so we started polling for Marquette in January of 2012. That was not only a presidential election year and a U.S. Senate year, but it was also the year in which Wisconsin's governor had been recalled and was facing a recall election in June. So we had a pretty busy first year with that recall in June, and then president and Senate elections in November. We've continued polling ever since. In 2014 with a governor's race, in 2016 with the presidential and Senate race, 2018 governor and Senate, and now this year with the presidential race. We've gotten all of those races right, with one really critical exception. In 2016, we had Hillary Clinton ahead by 6 points in our final poll, and Donald Trump won Wisconsin by 0.8%. And so that was our big error. It was an error shared with 30 other pollsters in the state. But that error here, and also in Michigan and Pennsylvania, meant that all of our evidence going into the election night was that those 3 states were likely to go to Clinton, and she was leading in all but one of over 100 polls in those states. And yet we were all wrong except for that one. And so this is the lesson of 2016. It's an issue that we bring up all the time, and people bring up all the time. And those collective errors, not just mine, but certainly mine as well, is the reason why there is such anxiety about 2016 and the polling now that shows Joe Biden consistently leading in virtually every national poll and in the vast majority of battleground polls in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But none of us, pollsters least of all, can forget that 2016 surprised us, and surprised us pretty tellingly. So those are the issues that we face going into this year, and throughout the course of the show, we'll talk about some of those things, but I think that's the big background that I would put in front of us.
Thank you, and I see what you did there. You copped to it directly, so you've taken out that firepower that people were ready to push on you and ask you about.
Trust me, if I could hide from it, I would. But seriously, there is no hiding from it, and there's no reason to hide for it. It's actually good, and not good to be wrong. Believe me, that's not good. But it's good for the public to understand the fallibility of polling as well. I think, if anything, 2016 helped remove the notion that we could simply take the polls and never have any doubts about them, conclude that the race was completely over, and maybe change our behavior based on that. So to that extent, I think it was good for the public to know that, yeah, these things can be wrong. And I close every final press release with saying, listen, remember, polls don't vote, people do. The election is in the voters' hands, not in the pollsters' hands. Go and work your will. That's what a democracy is about.
Thank you, folks. Before we hear from Charles, and I have some questions, we're just going to do, Charles, what we call a global tour. We're going to see where people are watching from, and some of the places may be places you've been to, you have memories of, and others maybe places you haven't yet been to, and maybe it's on a bucket list. Someone said he doesn't call it bucket list, he calls it a life list, because bucket list is a little scary. So let's start with Jonathan Borstein, watching from Union Square in New York. He's been watching for 149 straight days. You said you were in New York last. What is your favorite New York memory?
Oh, it's always walking past Lincoln Center in election weekend and just the joy of in those days anyway, the crowds in the street. I often walk far north along the avenues there, and it's just a joy to come to a city that's so alive with so many people out. And the beauty of Lincoln Center, I have to say, just touches me every time I'm there.
Awesome. Mark is here. I had said that he should say hello. Mark says hello from Durham, North Carolina. We have a fellow Golden Eagle as a guest for you. They were Warriors when I was there, and now a Marquette fan, always a Marquette fan. So he's talking about the name change that took place, and that was a big deal. It was named for Native American symbols, and they changed it to Golden Eagles. And this was part of the conversation that came up, Charlie, when we met this week. We did an event about Native America under COVID, and we spoke specifically about this episode and what was it like on campus when they made that change. And we had Brett A. Chapman on Twitter, who is an expert on self-determination, whose ancestors were involved in a landmark civil rights ruling which helped end America's forced Indian removal policy, as it was called then. You can find all our archives, 149 episodes, on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/SreeNet. So let me go back to Charlie.
Yeah, the Marquette name change preceded my arrival in 2012, so it's been a while. I'm aware that it was controversial at the time. I think it was the right move, and I'm pleased that it was made as early as it was. But of course, these sort of mascot names remain controversial in the country. Most recently, the Washington football team finally changing its name, but not without controversy and not without a long debate about that issue.
And this is one of the consequences of the killing of George Floyd and the uprising in this country, which we've been covering. All right. Have you been to Durham, North Carolina?
I have indeed. I've also been to Chapel Hill, just to balance the scales there a little bit between the Duke and Chapel Hill fans.
Nice. Thank you. Deb is also watching from New York. Another New York memory.
I will go way back as a kid. Senior year of high school, we got the trip to New York, and I saw my first live theater productions. And the basic training of Pavel Hummel was one, a rather somewhat obscure these days. And also Godspell was the other theater show we saw. And, you know, that from a kid from a town of 3,000 people in South Alabama, being able to see live theater was just a revelation. It was wonderful.
3,000 people could have been in the theater, right?
Just about.
All right, let's see who else is here. Stefan is here. I've got power back in Ramsey, New Jersey, and I'm back, hoping everyone is doing well. Stefan is a great friend and a colleague in Digimentors, and this is his show that he does on Saturday mornings. Let's talk photography and social media. And tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, he has the amazing Vincent Laforêt, who's with us. He will be the guest. Check him out on Instagram. He's known as Air Laforêt because he is so great at aerial photography. So you'll want to join us and Stefan for this show. It's at 10 a.m. Eastern at Spin It Social Hour. We know you will enjoy it and learn a lot. Okay, let's keep going on the comments. And let's see, Rose Horowitz is here. Our power is restored. So glad you're set for your Spin It Social Hour, she says. She's one of our fab producers, Rose Horowitz 31. My wife Rupa is watching over on LinkedIn, and she says 149 days. She's lived through this, and she's made it possible for me to do this. So I'm so grateful to her and to all the partners and significant others of everyone who makes it possible for the rest of us to do work like this while they're doing their own thing and are so busy and doing very important work. Let's see who else is here. Ashok Sharma is here from Trivandrum in Kerala, India. Have you been to India?
I have not. That is part of the world that I have not journeyed to. I would love to do it sometime.
Geeta is from Memphis, Tennessee.
I've been there and I've eaten barbecue there. It's good barbecue.
One of my last trips was to Chattanooga in February, and I had like 15 other trips already planned through the summer to various places. And of course, that didn't happen. Mark is class of 1984. And Rose says, as long as I have an internet connection and my coffee, I think she's quoting you on that. And Mark says he was there for poli-sci, majored in journalism during the early 80s. And people are just commenting. And George Koshi is watching from Columbus Circle here in New York City. Let's see, Tim says spouses rule. And I think that is absolutely true. And Tim is watching from Northeast Pennsylvania. That is an important part of the polling story in the United States. Have you been to that part of Pennsylvania?
No, not the Northeast. I was born in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
And so I didn't stay there very long. I lived there until I was 3 years old, I believe, was when my parents moved back to the South, and that's where I was raised. But I was born in Valley Forge. I've been to Pittsburgh. I've been to Philadelphia. As I say, I was born there, but I've been to Penn State for a visit, but I have not traveled around the state and not to the northeast at all.
One thing they say about Pennsylvania that you've certainly heard, there's Pittsburgh, there's Philly, and then there is Alabama in the middle, right? That's what they say.
It's a very diverse state when you think about the voting coalitions there, with the big cities balanced against the countryside, which is much more conservative, much more Republican leaning. On the other hand, there's also been some real change in the suburbs in both around the Philadelphia and the Pittsburgh areas. And that's one of those things that as a pollster, as well as an election analyst, we're constantly looking at is how are the dynamics of elections outside of the center of the city shifting, and what's going on in the rural areas as well. That was a source of strength for Donald Trump in 2016, much stronger there than Mitt Romney had performed in the rural areas in 2012.
Lovish, who's watching in India, says, I believe it's quite early as per Indian Standard Time for this. It's 6:30, now closer to 7 in the morning. But people tune in. We have lots of people watching in India. Ashok says, yesterday was a tragic day. Nature played havoc here in southern India. After rains and an accident in an airport, soil erosion, flooding, and many people have lost their lives in the state. Our prayers are for everybody there. And let's see, we've got lots of comments coming in as I expected. And let's talk a little bit about the polls. I showed the website. Let's go back to it. Tell me what we can find. Where are we looking? What should we be looking at and for?
Sure. This is the main landing page for the poll. And what you'll see here is the most recent poll we've released, which was back in June, as this one says, in which we found that Joe Biden's lead had increased from 3 points the month before to an 8-point lead in June. Our next poll will be out next Tuesday, so you'll see an update on the webpage then. And if you look at the top of the screen, I'm not seeing it here, but if you go there in your web browser, you'll see some links, the most important of which is results and data. And there you go. And this, you can scroll back through the entire 61 polls that we've completed in Wisconsin since 2012. It'll be number 62 when it goes up on Tuesday.
So what is happening right now with that poll? Where is it? Do you have it on your desk in rough form, draft? I know you can't tell us anything about it, but you can tell us the process.
Yeah, we're still calling. We'll be calling through Sunday night. And so I will get the data, the final data, on Monday morning. We'll process that and we'll write it up and be ready to present it on Tuesday at 12:15 Central Time, 1:15 Eastern. And there's a web link also on the homepage there that you can go to if you want to see the results. Normally, we present that live in a full hour of discussion and presentation and Q&A from the audience. Obviously, under the circumstances, we're now recording about a 15-minute or so overview of the results and a conversation about them. But on that webpage, the results and data page in particular that you were just on, you can see the entire questionnaire, every single question we asked. You can see the top lines, which are the results for every single question, as well as crosstabs, those questions broken down by a number of demographic categories. And for the real nerds out there, you can see the methodology statement that goes into all of the details of how we did the survey, the margin of error, what the sample design does to that, and what our response rate was.
Thank you. Vandana has she's one of our other producers, Vandana_Menon. Check the poll here, law.marquette.edu/poll. And she's also put in a link to all 61 completed polls. So the calls are happening now. How can you get that together so quickly by Tuesday? It's already Friday night.
Sure. Well, we obviously get partial results each night. And so we process those. We're seeing where the polling's going. Obviously, or maybe it's not obvious to folks, is that as we get each night's results, sometimes they can change. Sometimes the last night can tip a number a bit one way or another. But as we get closer and closer to our final total of 800, it's less and less likely that one more night of interviewing will change that. Rarely does the story hinge on a number that might change on the last night. Now, that can be false. Obviously, if the race is really tied, which it was in the governor's race here in 2018, then you have to see that last night of data. But when we present the results in our press release and our discussion of it, we are mostly just telling you what those results show, not characterizing them in some way, and certainly not saying someone has a big lead or a tiny lead. We might say it's very close, but we would leave it to the reader to make those kinds of interpretations. As a result, the way I write the analysis of the poll doesn't depend very much on those last minute changes. But if something does come up and surprise us, that's what Monday afternoon and Monday night is for.
Excellent. I look forward to seeing your poll on Tuesday. I know you would have preferred to come on here after you've done that. You also have work to do on a Friday night, but I'm so grateful, and I hope lots of people will tune in on Tuesday. And is there a mailing list or something people can sign up for?
There's not an explicit mailing list, but the website there is frequently updated, and certainly on, I should say, at Polls and Votes, my Twitter account. But the poll itself has a Twitter account as well, which is at MU Law Poll, all one string. And when we do a release, we live tweet the results for all of the questions that we're talking about as part of the release. So you can see those scroll by on your Twitter account in more or less real time. And we also obviously include the links to the homepage for the poll and for the results pages for that poll.
Excellent. Here we are looking at polls and votes. You went for your profession rather than your name as your Twitter handle. And we're looking at it, and you have pollsandvotes.com, and you're a professor emeritus at University UW-Madison, another great university. Just talk about Madison for a minute and your time there.
Sure. Well, I went to grad school at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and that's where my PhD is from. I then taught for 8 years at Washington University in St. Louis, which is down to the southeast of Chicago, if we make everything about where we are relative to Chicago. And then in 1992, I moved to Wisconsin, great university, great political science department. And I had a wonderful 21 years teaching here in Madison. But I reached a point where there were questions about, did I want to continue what I was doing with graduate students and with undergraduates, especially emphasizing quantitative methods and analysis, which I love and which I really enjoyed teaching. But when the opportunity came up to do this sort of public polling at Marquette, it was a very tempting offer, and enough so that I retired from UW-Madison, hence the emeritus status as a professor, former professor here, and moved full-time to Marquette, where I plan to finish my days.
Wait a minute. If you're an emeritus professor, aren't you supposed to just hang it up and relax and just, do some reading, some writing, ironing your elbow patch on your jacket? What are you still working for?
I'm working on that. My wife retired this summer, so she's setting a good example for me about what can be done along those lines. Unfortunately, I'm one of those incredibly narrow people who really doesn't know what he'd do with himself if he wasn't looking at polling data.
And do you ever say to your wife, if I didn't have all of that time on the polling, then she may get sick of you if you're just hanging around the house with nothing to do?
I think we're both a little concerned about that, so I'm trying to get out of the house even in these times. No, we're actually, in all seriousness, it's been a really pleasant summer for us all to be together. That's the one upside of this.
That's right. You said that your family was a little bit bigger these days, back in with the family all quarantining together.
Right. Well, actually, our daughter had not moved out of the house, so she's here, and going to college here in Madison. So, but living at home in any case.
Awesome. Is it traditional for a University of Michigan grad to also go to the University of Washington? I mean, University of Madison?
Well, Wisconsin was a bit of a stretch, and I have to tell you, I realized I'd made the transition one year when Michigan and Wisconsin were playing for who went to the Rose Bowl, and I was cheering for Wisconsin. And I knew at that point that I'd finally made the transition.
You had to do that carefully, though, with some of your older friends.
Yeah, don't tell anybody, okay? Let's just keep it between the two of us.
Exactly. We have international people watching right now who have no idea what the heck we're talking about. So that's college football rivalry. You know, in other countries, especially in India, there are college sports teams, but it isn't big-time sports. Sometimes bigger than professional sports in some calculations is what American football, especially American basketball, and that's what we're talking about. And Mark was telling me earlier that the Golden Eagles at Marquette won some kind of recent basketball tournament in a bubble and all of that. I didn't follow it exactly, but I don't know if you followed it.
Yeah, I think that was one of those fantasy things. We did win a national championship, but that was quite a ways back. Also, first of all, let me just say that my knowledge of cricket is quite limited. And so I appreciate that sports analogies don't translate very well all the time. And I apologize for that.
That was my fault. I brought it up. All right, let's keep our tour going. Here is Apollo watching from Vegas. What can you tell us about any Vegas trips that are publicly shareable?
Vegas trips, I've not made very many. But I have been there a couple of times, and my father-in-law and mother-in-law live there.
So you have no good stories, clearly.
I am the worst Vegas tourist. I've been there, I think it's 3 times. I have yet to wager my first penny on anything. And so I'm sorry to say that the charms of Vegas are largely lost on me. I go there for these family events and I enjoy those, but no, sorry, not my thing.
We had an unbelievable story in one of these that rivaled the movie The Hangover. So you never know what's going to happen. You said you didn't bet your first penny. There are people who've bet their firstborn, right? In terms of
yes.
Going out there. Here's Billy watching from Atlanta, and he runs a project called the Bump Experiment, and he's fabulous, and we're going to have him on our show one of these days. Billy von Schritz, please say hello. And Paulo says, I remember the Cricket World Cup in Bangladesh when England lost, and Apollo is an American who lives and a former New Yorker who lives in Las Vegas, and he went to India and Bangladesh and lived there, and he talked to us on our show. He was here talking about Vegas and what's like under COVID, but he also told us what's it like to be an African-American man living and working in India and Bangladesh. He had some, as you can imagine, some interesting stories to share. So let's go to some of the basics. And before we do that, everybody who's watching, please tag, please share. What a rare treat for us. We see pollsters on TV all the time, but they come on the air, say some things, answer a couple of questions, and they're gone. We've got this gentleman trapped here for the next 4 hours. No, sorry, just the next 20 minutes. And this is your chance. Ask him questions. I'm going to get an education right now. I'm going to ask some very basic things that will help us prepare for the November elections. This is not about being political. This is about getting smart politically so that we can understand the craziness that this country has. So let's talk about margin of error and why that matters and how to understand it in different polls?
Sure. So the first thing is margin of error mostly just depends on the sample size. How big the sample is, the larger the sample, the smaller the margin of error. If you were trying to estimate how many red M&Ms are in a jar of M&Ms, you could pull out just one M&M blind and look at the color. But that would either tell you they were all red or none of them were red, but with a really big margin of error, right? But if you pull out 50 M&Ms and count the percentage red, you'll get pretty close to what's really in the jar. If you pull out 100, you'll get even better. If you pull out 1,000, this is a really big M&M jar, then you'll be even more accurate. And so that's the intuition about why the margin of error gets smaller as we get a larger sample. What's not intuitive is it really doesn't matter much what the total population is. So whether we're drawing a sample of 1,000 people from a city of 100,000, or drawing 1,000 people from a nation of 300 million or a billion, that margin of error is pretty much the same regardless of what the population size was. And that's not so intuitive, but is a theorem. There's actually a mathematical theorem showing why that is and showing why it works.
And so we should pay attention, but not get drowned in, we shouldn't drown in it.
The problem here is that with my example, that jar of M&Ms is sitting there. It's a fixed population, and none of the M&Ms are making a decision to change their mind about what color they are. When we're doing polling, two things are going on. One is not everyone is willing to talk to us on the phone, and that introduces a source of error. And the other is what we call broadly non-sampling errors. And that's depending on how I word the question. If I word the question saying, you're surely not going to vote for so-and-so, I will obviously get a very different answer than if I say, in the election, there's this candidate for this party and that candidate for the other party. Who are you going to vote for? Or outside the US, there might be 4, 5, 6, 7 other candidates or parties you might vote for. And so how we word the questions and also the order in which we ask them can matter. If I'm asking you a question right after I've given you a series of questions about a particular issue, then that might change your frame of reference when you ask the subsequent question. These are things that pollsters and the social scientists that provide the fundamental academic knowledge about this deal with all the time. We do an unbelievable number of, for people not in the field, incredibly boring experiments to see whether the order we ask questions matter, to see what phrasing might differ, and to see whether it matters whether you give people 4 choices of an answer or 5 choices of an answer. It turns out 5 provides a middle point, and people tend to gravitate to the middle when that's the case.
Thank you. Apollo jumps in with a question. Can we trust the polls? Does methodology matter? How do we prevent complacency? Like, it's got a lot of questions in here.
I was going to say, this is not one question here.
When polled, people thought there was a coronation afoot only to come up short. And I will say that I'm seeing right now, Charles, a similar drumbeat, except much earlier in the process. And so we'll come to Clinton's stuff in a little bit, because I do want to revisit that. But for now, please answer those first 2 questions.
Sure.
How do we prevent complacency, and can we trust the polls?
Yeah, well, I think this is complicated. I think that complacency is quite an issue. I'd have to say that it's an issue of the voters and the consumers of polls. I'm not quite sure how I, as a pollster, can influence that complacency. My job is to design the methodology as well as I know how to do it, and collect the data with the best standards that I know how to apply, and then to walk out and tell you what those results show. Not to embellish them, not to twist them in one way or another, and certainly not to put my own views on what they show. But that said, if the polls, as they are doing now nationally, are showing Joe Biden with a substantial lead, I think as pollsters, we're reporting what our data show. If that induces complacency, I have to say, I don't think it's the pollster's job to try to reduce that. That's up to citizens themselves, but also candidates and campaigns to deal with. Now, I told you earlier that at the end of every final release, I say, remember, polls don't vote. The outcome of the election is up to you, the voters. Go and make your own decisions. And for goodness sake, don't vote based on what my poll told you. Vote on what's in your interests and what you believe in. And I'm perfectly happy at that point to leave it in the hands of the voters. I don't want to be dismissive of the complacency argument, because I think that is a serious one, that in any election in which it appears to be a very substantial lead for either candidate, there's a double risk. The one risk is that supporters of the losing candidate will give up and stay home, and then, it's an even bigger blowout. But the converse is also plausible. That is, that the candidate that's well ahead, their supporters may decide, oh, it really doesn't matter if I vote for them. I think I'll stay home, or maybe I'll vote for that third party candidate I like a little bit better. And those are, again, things that need to be part of the public discussion throughout the election year. But I surely should not come out and tell you the race is closer than what our data actually show. That would clearly be a wrong thing to do. And so this is a real difficulty. As for trusting the polls, again, I said earlier, I think the one valuable thing about 2016 is surely no one is coming into 2020 with an excess trust in the polls without any notion that they could be wrong. So I think that's an upside to the reality check we got in 2016.
Okay, we have lots of questions and about 15 minutes left with Charles. One of my questions is the importance of Wisconsin. Someone might say, hey, why are you talking to a guy who's an expert on one state? This is not just any state. If we can get a quick sketch of the history of Wisconsin all the way, maybe from the 60s to
Sure.
the 2016 election, it has played outsized roles in multiple elections in multiple years.
It has, and in 2016, it was especially important because of where we fall. I'm going to say this especially for non-US viewers. We have this two-step election process in which each state is won by a candidate based on the vote within that state. But then the state casts electoral college votes equal to the size of their number of members of the US House of Representatives plus the 2 votes for the US senators from the state. And so this two-step process involves the Electoral College as well as the popular vote. In 2016, the popular vote was won by Hillary Clinton by about just over 2%, 2.1 percentage points nationwide. And there's no question she won the popular vote. But in the Electoral College, it was because Donald Trump won Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin that put him over the majority in the Electoral College. So those 3 states were extremely close and were all won by Trump. And all 3 of those states had been won by Barack Obama twice in the previous 2 elections. So that's the first reason why it matters and why Wisconsin matters. Further, even if Clinton had won Michigan and Pennsylvania, Wisconsin going for Trump would have given him the Electoral College majority by, I think, 1 Electoral College vote. So it means that going into this year's election, if no other states change their winner, then the Democrats have to win Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin in order to get an Electoral College majority. Now, in fact, right now, we're seeing at least 3 other states that Trump won Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina as showing Biden leads. And as a result, there are now more ways for Biden to win the Electoral College than if it were just these three critical states from 2016. So as a result, Wisconsin's role as the pivotal state may not be as great this year if one of those new three states were to flip and vote for the Democrats. But there are a lot of combinations, and Wisconsin is near the middle of that Electoral College majority, no matter which of 3 or 6 or even 8 or 9 states you might want to add into the mix.
Thank you. This is such useful information for us to understand. And folks, if you're watching, we're talking to Charles Franklin at Polls and Votes on Twitter. Please follow him. This is the first of many episodes we'll do between now and November on understanding the elections and the issues at hand. And we hope to be able to put what we are learning from Charles to work as we understand and we can become better voters. Stefan says, amen, Charles. Thank you for making the statement. Please, no matter what the polls say, go vote. And Mark says, how are pollsters dealing with absentee voting and mail-in voting? Can you explain the very convoluted confusion that has been injected into what was a very benign process, unpolitical process for all these years, suddenly has become political and is injecting lots of confusion and chaos? And we know that that's something that at least one person in the world likes.
Yeah. This is really complicated. Long ago, most Americans voted in person on Election Day, Tuesday in November, and it was relatively difficult to vote by absentee. You, in most states at that point, 20, 30, 40 years ago, needed to have a valid excuse for why you were going to be out of state and unable to vote on Election Day. Over the last 30 or so years, really 40, more and more states started relaxing that rule and introduced something called no excuse absentee voting, which means you don't need to have a reason to vote absentee. You simply have to request an absentee ballot, and the election officials will send you that ballot through the mail. You will fill it out and mail it back, and it'll be counted on Election Day. A few states have moved to all absentee voting. Vote by mail is universal in Colorado and Washington and a couple of other states. But this year, we're seeing an explosion of interest in voting by absentee ballot because of people's concerns of going to the polls on Election Day in the midst of an epidemic. So some of the issues that we're facing simply have to do with how difficult it is to build up the capacity to handle, in Wisconsin, well over 1 million ballots. We could be at possibly 2 million ballots by mail, whereas normally we would not be anywhere close to that. We would be under 100,000 in previous elections recently. So this is a big administrative challenge. Then on top of it, you have the president pushing a very strong criticism of voting by mail. Ironically, even as his own campaign urges his voters to vote by mail. And this is a very complicated but very political process. And finally, you have the risk of simple error. When ballots are sent back, they can be invalidated. One of the most common issues is when you send your ballot back, you have to, almost everywhere, sign the outside of the envelope. When the ballot comes in, the signature is compared to your signature that they have on file from when you registered to vote. And then they separate the envelope from the ballot. So the ballot remains secret, but it's validated that you sent it back and it's your signature and that you are a registered voter and all of those things. So there's a lot of security that's built into the process. But what if I forget to sign it? Or what if I've had some health condition and now my signature doesn't match the signature on file from 20 years ago or 30 years ago? Or what if the post office fails to deliver the ballot, either to me ahead of time, or I put it in the mail, but it doesn't get back to the elections office in time? All of these are legitimate and serious concerns about how we conduct this election, and we're doing it under the worst possible circumstances and without a sort of united approach to trying to beef this up and make the system work. Instead, there's real issues of financial support and personnel resources to help make it happen.
Thank you. Mark is tagging all his friends. Interesting how Sree is doing polling, is what he's doing on polling and how it works. Great idea, folks. If there's someone in the world who's interested in politics, please tag them. They can watch the recording. It'll be right here on these platforms: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And Mark is also linked out to Marquette University, the Alumni Association, the Golden Eagles, and telling them all to watch. We appreciate that. Let's see. He says, I remember covering Gary Hart's campaign in the 80s and also seeing John Anderson attempting a wild card campaign. Same with Lenora Fulani. Is there any suggestion from a polling standpoint that we may see a third-party candidate win within a generation of two? I have another question about third parties, but let's go to actually win. Is there anything there? Is there any hunger for a real third-party candidate?
Win is really quite a stretch. I think you would have to see a substantial breakdown of both the Democratic and the Republican Party for it to build up enough strength for a third party to succeed, certainly in presidential elections. We've seen third parties win in state elections for governor and for senator. So it can happen, but it almost always has happened when there's been a major breakdown in not just one, but both of the major two parties in the country. Our electoral system very strongly favors two parties rather than three. And that comes from our winner-take-all system of both winning election to Congress and to the presidency through winning electoral college seats. When you look at the strongest third-party candidates, in 1992, the third-party candidate won just under 20% of the national vote, but did not win a single electoral college vote. And if we go back to earlier third-party candidates, usually candidates that had a regional base, often in the American South, those candidates could win a few electoral votes because they came from the region and they often had a distinctively racist appeal, to be frank about it. And in the process, picked up some electoral college votes. I don't think generally we believe that that tipped the outcome of the election, but it certainly was a case where even the strongest third-party candidates did not come anywhere close to winning the presidency.
So my understanding of the third-party candidates in 2016 is that Stein and Johnson, who weren't serious, may have been serious, but weren't, viable to win the election in any way. They won more votes than the margin of victory that Donald Trump had. They were not in the exact same states,
right,
but if they were more than that margin of 70-something thousand votes, weren't they?
Oh, by far. Here in Wisconsin, the presidential race was decided by just 23,000 votes. And both Stein and Johnson, the Libertarian and the Green candidates, won far more than that. The reason for voting for a third party is you really don't like the top two parties, and you have some reason to want to express support for a libertarian ideology or a Green Party ideology. And that's every voter's right and every voter's choice, whether they wish to do that or not. I do think that we saw an exceptionally high level of third-party voting here in Wisconsin in 2016. It was about 5% of the total vote. So again, way more than the 1% or a little less than 1% that Trump won by. If we go back to 2000, the last time we had an extremely close presidential race and the Electoral College put President Bush in office rather than Al Gore, who had won the popular vote in 2000, we saw a really substantial drop-off in third-party voting 4 years later in 2004. So I think it's an open question of whether we see something like that repeat this year. So far, there's been relatively little national polling that has asked about the third-party candidates. That will change as they officially qualify for ballots in the next month or so. And so we will have a better idea through polling, at least, about how much support third-party candidates are drawing this year, but we just don't have it yet.
So let me ask you this. Is there a question about Kanye West yet on your polls?
Actually, this is very relevant because just yesterday, ballot, again, the U.S. system, third-party candidates have to submit nominating signatures to the elections office, ballot petitions to be added to the ballot. Right now, all of the third-party candidates in Wisconsin just submitted those petitions, and Kanye West in particular's petitions have been challenged. And so the elections board will make a decision and review those petitions and come to the conclusion of whether he has gathered the sufficient number of signatures to be on the ballot. If they conclude that he has, then barring a legal case, he will be on the ballot in November. We don't know because it's just happened tonight that those challenges have been filed.
So the question is he in enough states where he attracts enough people to make a difference? And why wouldn't Donald Trump and the Russians encourage him to run?
He's certainly not in enough states, as far as I know, as of today, and let me qualify it that way. He doesn't have enough states where he could even conceivably command an electoral college majority. So that's not a question at all. But the question you raise is the right one, and that is, would he affect the election between Trump and Biden by possibly drawing voters to him who might otherwise have supported Biden, in which case that would favor Trump? Or could he draw away some people from Trump? To the ironic extent that Trump has encouraged West entering the race, you could imagine a situation in which some Trump supporters think that West is a good guy and go with him. So I don't think it's entirely obvious what effect he has, though I think most people believe that he's more of a threat to Biden than he is to Trump. But again, the key thing is this ends up in voters' hands, and I'm a small d Democrat. I think the voters get to make these choices. And if they'd rather vote for Kanye West or the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or the Constitution Party, that is absolutely their right as voters to make those decisions. And it's the obligation of the campaigns to make their cases for those votes, not to accuse those voters of doing something wrong by expressing their choice. Make the case, win their votes. And if you can't do that, so be it.
So, and remember, the rent is too damn high party in New York. I don't know if that made it out to Wisconsin.
Oh, it's a classic.
In terms of one last thing about Kanye, the point is that he doesn't have to have a national strategy. You named 6 states, as I remember: Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, right? 6 states.
Perfect.
that are important for the future of the election. Even in one, if he gets, let's say, or let's just go to Michigan. In Michigan, he gets 2% of the vote. Trump won by 1%, right? Less than 1%.
Less than 1% in Michigan,
So that's why anybody who thinks these third-party candidates are not important, don't matter, it was don't worry, vote for anybody. We learned from Ralph Nader that it matters. We learned from Ross Perot that it matters, and we learn from Johnson and Stein that it matters, and we may learn again from Kanye that it matters. Even a single state can make a difference in this process. We talked about 50. The entire election basically came down to 77,000 votes in 3 states. This time we're talking about 6 states. And so even if he does one state where he is, and remember, it's not just about Kanye's appeal, and I will push back a little bit, Charles. that it's not just about the campaigns. There is something we haven't seen in previous American history. Oppo research, yes, but there's a whole disinformation campaign on social media that didn't exist before, and Russians actively picking one candidate over another. The accusation is that the Chinese are also picking one candidate over another, but I would say the Russians have more experience in America than the Chinese on this count. It is getting late. We need to let you go. Let's just read a couple of other comments here. Apollo asks, who paid Kanye's debts? And Daryl says, I think Kanye West is a fan and friend of Donald Trump and is doing this to try to split the Biden vote. So he goes right there and is talking about that. And Tim says, oh my God, the rent is too damn high, guy. That's all he ever said. And someone's remembering Lord Buckethead, which was also a kind of, but in England, they have kind of spoiler candidates who are characters and caricatures, and it's completely normal.
That's right. And I think the point I want to just push is that if you sincerely support a third-party candidate, whoever they are, express those preferences. You know, that's fine. I think that's what we should be doing. I think the disinformation you're talking about, the interference in elections, and the broader challenge of people not knowing where to get trusted information, or at least having all of their sources of trusted information questioned, is a real problem that we're facing in the US, but elsewhere also. You know, the sort of hope of large mass democracies is that we as citizens don't know every detail of government, but we at least ought to know whether things are going pretty well or pretty poorly, and who to blame and who to reward. And the challenge of the world of disinformation that we live in right now is a weakening of those ties between things that are happening in the world and the way we perceive them. And we may not even appreciate whether our situations are being affected by the government and government leadership. And I think that weakening of the tie between objective conditions and voting is one of the challenges of our current era, and the challenge of distorted news and information that's purposely targeted to make people not understand their situation.
And that is so sad. Macron says average polling in America is so low. I think he means voting. Votes cast are 15% on average, while in India, it is never less than 55% and 100% in many places who take pride in polling. How do you explain that?
Yeah, ours is not quite as low as that. We're in the ballpark of 50% of eligible voters nationwide, higher in presidential elections, lower in congressional elections without a presidential race on the ballot. And it varies a lot from state to state. Here in Wisconsin, our actual vote will be in the order of 75% of adult citizens. But of people who are registered to vote in Wisconsin, we'll hit about 90% who actually vote. Now, Wisconsin is almost always in the top 3 in the country, and there are plenty of states you could go to that have drastically lower. But when I've had the luck to talk elsewhere in the world about this comes up a lot, and it's not fundamentally wrong. American turnout is lower than in most other democracies.
But I'm shocked to hear it's as high as 70 and 90%, depending on how you count in Wisconsin. I'm glad to hear it. What are the other top 2 or 3 states?
Minnesota and Iowa, and sometimes New Hampshire's in there as well.
And in there first in the country and all of that. Okay.
Well, and also we have election day registration in Wisconsin. We make it relatively easy for you to register to vote, even at the last minute. And in those states that have election day registration, you universally see a higher turnout rate. The issue of what are the burdens that we put on people to register ahead of time, especially if they have to register a month ahead of time, and photo ID and other kinds of things, some of which have a perfectly legitimate purpose. But anything you do to increase the costs of registration and voting is going to drive down turnout. And those states that have made it easier have higher turnouts.
And Moira says hello from LA. So here's your chance to talk about LA.
I lived in Pasadena. I was at Caltech for 2 semesters and thoroughly loved my time there. But it was totally atypical because I stayed in Pasadena. I was not in a single freeway backup, which no one who lives in LA can believe that could have happened.
Well, we are just so grateful to you for being with us, for sharing all this knowledge. Everyone, please check out Polls and Votes on Twitter at Polls and Votes. I'll give you a chance to give us a final thought before you go. And please check out the the Marquette University Law School Poll. Marquette University Law School Poll, and big new results coming out on Tuesday. I'm disappointed to say that Charles didn't give us any sneak preview tonight, but that's okay. You'll all tune in on Tuesday to see that. And Marcus says he wants to vote. He wants to vote and poll. And with that, let's go to Charles and let him give us a final thought.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate doing it. I appreciate the questions we've gotten. It's been a stimulating and enjoyable conversation for my part. Friday night, a little bit late. I think I shall retire and relax at this point. But again, thank you for having me on very much. And thank you all for watching.
Thank you. And everyone, please follow Charles and watch for him as he helps people understand what's going on in Wisconsin, battleground state, a state that is going to play a crucial role in what happens this fall. So we're going to say goodnight to Charles at Polls and Votes. Thanks very much, Charles. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles, for being here. Thank you for supporting us by your attention. We are so grateful to all of you. Before we go, I want to tell you what we're doing tomorrow. You don't want to miss this. Tomorrow is our 150th episode of shows that we've done 150 days, 150 episodes. And tomorrow we want your voice in the show. How do we do that? We are using Flipgrid, Flipgrid. Just go to flipgrid.com and type in the code SREESHOW, SREESHOW, or hold up your phone right now and get this this QR code, and you can record a 1-minute video that I will then show on the air tomorrow. So you have till 9 p.m. Eastern time, or even a little later, because we're going till 11. And we've invited back some of our favorite guests to be with us. We've asked favorite guests to leave us a little video, 1-minute video. I'll just show you how it works. You go on to flipgrid.com/SreeShow, and you can ask me. Oh, there's Mark. He's always first. He's awesome. Mark, you are amazing. And he's already recorded a video. I want to savor that and save that to tomorrow. And all of you should do that. Leave a little prediction. What's going to happen 5 months from now, over the next 5 months? What's happening 5 months? What has happened so far in the last 5 months? Would love to hear your thoughts, and you can go back and watch it at some point. We did this for 100, 125, and now 150. It's hard to imagine 150 episodes tomorrow, 5 straight months of the pandemic. And every day we've been here, and we're able to do that only because of you and your support. Sree Show, here's the hashtag, here's the QR code. Please use it. I am so grateful to all of you for supporting us in this way. And before we go, one of the things we do before we read our ads is to say their names. This is part of our work that we asked Kimberly Crenshaw, the professor who coined the term intersectionality, how can we be allies of the African-American community? And she said simply, say their names, say her name. And so we've been doing that every single episode since then, and we're going to do that right now. We are going to do this by using this image from Time magazine. And you see Titus Caffer's really moving portrait of a young mother with a young child. And on the right, you see a photograph of a young Larcinia Floyd with her young George Floyd, her son. She would die 2 years almost to the day that he would be killed. They're now buried together in Houston. He, of course, was killed in Minneapolis. And here are the names: Trayvon Martin, Yvette Smith, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald, Tanisha Anderson, Akai Gurley, Tamir Rice, Jeraine Reed, Natasha McKenna, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, William Chapman, Sandra Bland, Darius Stewart, Philip Dubose. I'm going to pause there to ask you, how many of these names do you know? Some of these are very well-known names and others are not. Janet Wilson, Kaylin Rockmore, Alton Sterling, Philando Castile, Joseph Mann, Terrence Crutcher, Chad Robertson, Jordan Edwards, Aaron Bailey, Stefan Clark, Danny Ray Thomas, Antoine Rose, Botham Jean, Tatiana Jefferson, Michael Dean, Ahmad Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. These were the names on the cover of that Time magazine, but of course there are so many others. Occasionally we also read from the list of the Say Her Name report as well. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your support. Please be in touch. Please tell us how we can work together. We're always looking for guests and story ideas, subject ideas, sponsor ideas. So just email me. You can see right there my email address. We'd love to work with you and talk to you about ways we can work together. So let's thank our sponsors. Muckrack Academy, Fundamentals of Social Media, free certification available, mrac.co/social, mrac.co/social. Grab your own free certificate. More than 4,000 people have taken the course, mrac.co/social. We're also grateful to Nunbelievable, divinely delicious cookies on a mission, 20% off with the code SREE, SREE, 20% off. Please check out nunbelievable.com. And we want to tell you about tomorrow's episode of She's on Call. And this is a show with, Sunday's episode, 11 a.m. Eastern, with Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar and Dr. Marina Kurian. We'll have as their guests a psychologist and a fourth-year medical student. So it will be a great way to understand what's going on in the world of medicine and especially COVID-19. That's at 11 a.m. on Sunday. At 8:30 a.m. on Sunday is our other show, which is called the New York Times Read Along. We absolutely want you to join us for that. Please be here as I read the Sunday New York Times out loud, like I've been doing for many years, almost 5 years. Elaine Sciolino is with us, contributing writer and former Paris bureau chief of the New York Times. She's been in Paris since 2002. This is at 8:30 a.m. Eastern, and then at 11 a.m. Eastern is She's on Call. On Saturday morning, we have our own adventure on our spin-off show, Coping with COVID-19, a helpful, hopeful call-in show. This is on WBAI Radio, so no video involved. We have two fabulous guests, Professor John Marshall, who's an assistant professor and media expert at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism, and Dr. Hafia El-Tahir, who's an ENT surgeon, will be with us. She's from Rutgers University. You don't want to miss this. You can listen on 99.5 FM in New York or anywhere in the world, WBAI.org. WBAI.org, noon to 2, a 2-hour call-in radio show. And with that, let's thank our final sponsor, Hotstar.
Hotstar Premiere Nights. Watch the year's biggest blockbusters streaming straight to your screen, exclusively on Hotstar.
Yes, please check out hotstar.com/US and look at Moira's comment. Hotstar, I love it. Watch all their shows. My only connection to Desi content is Hotstar, and that's what Moira says. So thank you, Moira, for watching our sponsors, supporting our sponsors. If any of you would like to be a sponsor, please let us know. Let's see who the comments are from. Tim Sohn is here. Great show tonight. Thank you, Tim. Was our very first sponsor all the way back in the first few weeks. We're very grateful. And so many other people watching, including Doug Levy, who says, interesting topic. Doug has a fabulous daily newsletter that you must sign up for. Check out douglevy.substack.com, douglevy.substack.com, or just email him or tweet at him, sfdoug on Twitter, at sfdoug. Apollo says, thank you, Charles. My mom's watching, late to sign in. Hi, Amma, love you always. Thank you for being here, means so much. Thank you for saying their names, says Apollo. And thank you for saying Vandana and Rose, Paul Neal. You're awesome. And join us tomorrow for our 150th episode. Please send in a video. A reminder that you can easily do this. You go to flipgrid.com/Sree Show, flipgrid.com/Sree Show, and you will be very easily able to send us a video greeting that we will play on the air. Here's Flipgrid, FLIPGRID, flipgrid.com/Sree Show. So we'd love to have your comments and make sure that people can listen to you. We want to hear your thoughts on the 150th episode or the last 5 months, or what your predictions are for the next 5 months. Incredibly important 5 months for this country and for this planet. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting us.